Now let's study the annotations we have seen so far. Entity is used to mark a class as an entity. Table is used only when the class name differs from the name used in the database. ID is used to mark the primary key. If the primary key name or basically any column name is different from the field name, we use column annotation. For example, in our case, the primary key was named staff underscore ID in the database. We are going to use staff ID, our camel case notation of Java. That's why we used the column annotation. Column annotations over here were not actually required. Generator value is used to mention the strategy used for generating the primary key. In our case, we are going to use generated type identity, means the database is going to auto generate or auto increment the primary key. Now many a times databases support functionality for storing large objects like pictures, documents, presentations, your PDF files. For that, databases usually have two types of fields. One is glob and another is blob. Blob stands for binary large object and glob stands for character large objects. So basically you can store pictures in a type of blob. So let's try to save a picture for our staff. Let's go and alter table. Let's add a pic field. Let's name this pic for storing the employee picture. Then you can either make it blob or glob. We will make it blob. Now in MySQL, large character data is stored using these types. It's not exactly named as glob. You can use these types for that. Okay, and let's save it. Now let's provide mapping for the just newly added pic column. So go over here, add a field named pic, and the type is byte array. For storing blobs we use byte array, for storing globs we use character array. Now we have to mention another annotation over here. The annotation is named lob. Let's generate getters and setters for this column, or rather this field. Insert code, getter setters, pic. Here are our getters and setter. So for saving this picture, I'm going to use classes from the Apache Common Utils library. So let's first put a dependency on it. Add dependency. Let's search for Apache Common Utils IO. Here it is, Apache Common IO. Add the dependency, and now I'm going to just copy paste some code over here. Basically this code, like previously, we just created objects of staff, we assign some fields, and over here we assign the pic field. We have to import the annotation. So basically everything is same as before. We create a class, we assign some fields. Before assigning this field, we read the pic into a byte array using this class which is present in Apache Common Utils, and then we persist the object. So let's first clear the screen and let's save it. Saving as equal to deploying the project. And here you get persisting stuff with pic, which is this line. So let's see our database. Let's open this table, and here you can see there's a blob field saved in the pic column. Now people usually recommend to put just paths in the database and put the actual files in the file system. It actually depends upon the requirements of our organization. Now this record with the blob in it has the primary key of 5. So if I retrieve this record in using entity manager, basically the blob field is also eagerly retrieved with it. What if we want the blob field not to be loaded eagerly? What if we want it to be loaded when only the field is accessed? We can do that using an annotation. So for making this field to be loaded lazily, that is, the field should be loaded only when perhaps the get pic method is called, we'll use the annotation. And the annotation is basic, and we'll make the fetch type as lazy. However, this is just a hint to the provider. The provider can very well eagerly load this field also. Now notice this gender column. Here you can either store M or F denoting male or female, and the related mapping is over here, gender, which is mapped using a string. Now the problem is, this being a string field, the user can enter any kind of strings. He is not bound to enter just M or F. So to prevent the user from entering any random strings and just making him enter M or F, we'll use an enumerated type. So let's create an enumerated type. In this, let's create a new enum, go to other, go to Java, let's create an enum class, let's name it gender, let's create two constants in it, M, comma, F. So these are the two enum constants. So now let's change the string type to enum. Our enum type is named gender, and let's delete this getters and setter and let's regenerate them. We will regenerate, insert code, getters and setters, gender. Okay. Now another thing you have to do is you have to mention the enumerated type. We select enumerated. Now the type is string. Now the default type is ordinal. This is the default type, but we select string. If the default type is selected, which is ordinal, for M0 will be stored, for F1 will be stored. We don't want that. We want to store the string M or F. For that, we change the default type to string. So here I have written some sample code for testing our application. First I create an instance of a class, then I assign some field. For setting the gender, now we use the enum type instead of string. You can use M or F for this. Let's use F. And then we persist the application. Persist the class. Now let's save it. Now let's check our database. And here is our column, or rather the record, with enum staff as the name. You know, I observed that when sometimes you make changes to 2-3 files and then save the project gets redeployed 2 or 3 times, which eventually leads to 2 or 3 records for a single save. So we can actually stop this deploy on save feature. Right click on the project, properties, select run, and uncheck this deploy on save. Now the project won't get deployed when you save the application. Now after making any changes to the project like this and like this, you save the project, but it won't get deployed. So for deploying it, you have to run the project, run. There, it has executed just once. So till now we have only seen int fields and blobs and strings. Now let's add a date field. Alter table, let's add a new field. Let's say start date of an employee, when he starts his work, basically when he has joined the organization. And let's change the field to date time or just date. Okay, and let's apply, finish. Now for mapping the date field, let's create the field first. Private, the field type will be date, which is java.util.date, and start, let's make it date. Okay, and because the column name differs from the name in the database, we'll use a column annotation, and name is start date. Plus we have to specify an annotation to say whether this field is going to save a date, time, or both date and time. For that we use another annotation, which is temporal. and the type will be date. We are only interested in storing the date, not the time, or both the date and time. Let's create getters and setters for this also. Right click, insert code, getters and setters, select, save. Now let's create this employee with the date. New dated employee, and let's set the date, basically start date. And for creating the date, I'll use the calendar object, calendar dot get instance got dot get time. This basically gives me the current date. So let's save it, and we haven't applied it over here. Let's apply. Close everything. Now let's run this application. So it's persisting the enum stuff. So let's see. Let's go to this sample data. Here is the new dated stuff. Now there is another annotation called transient, which when applied to a field prevents it from getting persisted to the database. So here is one of my fields. It's part of the entity, but I marked it as transient. So when this entity gets saved, this field won't be persisted. Usually transient fields are basically calculated fields. Now let's say as this field is transient, in our set name method we assign some value to it, and when finally we persist this object, there is no relevance whatsoever to our transient field while persisting the object.